everyone. You are welcome to another episode of the Bold Conversations with Joyce Podcast. Here on this show, we discuss issues about education, about equality, empowerment, and anything developmental in Africa. Over the past decade, we have seen a major milestone made in ensuring that every child in Africa gets access to education. Ghana has been widely celebrated for expanding access to education. We have seen a lot of policies such as the free senior high school policy, the free compulsory basic education that are aimed at removing financial barriers to ensure many children get access to school. Now, these kind of policies have not only increased enrollment, it has also eased the financial pressure on many families in Ghana. However, behind these impressive enrollment figures lies a very quiet crisis that is usually not discussed about. And this crisis is affecting millions of children, particularly girls and learners in rural communities. Now, sometimes the national averages can be misleading. Over and over again, we see learning outcomes remain sharply divided along the lines of geography, gender, and socioeconomic status. Rural schools continue to face teacher shortages, overcrowded classrooms, limited learning materials, and weak infrastructure. Girls, particularly, face additional barriers that extend far beyond the classroom. The enrollment statistics tell us who enters the education system, but they don't tell us what happens when these students are inside the classroom or when they enter the education system. In many schools, students attend classes, yet they struggle to even read fluently, to even solve the basic mathematics problems or apply critical thinking skills. Quality education depends on more than attendance. It requires trained and supported teachers. It requires adequate instructional time, safe learning environment, and relevant learning materials. When these elements are missing, schooling becomes a holding space rather than a transformative experience. Across Ghana, and even in many African countries, learning outcomes continue to reflect where a child is born rather than their potential. Rural schools especially remain systematically under-resourced. Teacher deployment is uneven, and infrastructure gaps still persist. Recent reports on a school called Sabanjida DA Basic School in Ghana, where untrained teachers have been forced to step in to acute shortages, is not an isolated case. It is a sign that there is a broader structural challenge within the education system. Rural disadvantage is often framed as logistical challenge, like distance, population density, or remoteness. But in reality, it is a policy choice. Decisions about where trained teachers are posted, how education budgets are allocated, and which schools receive infrastructure investment actively shape who benefits from education reform. When education systems fail to account for rural realities, they do not neutralize inequality, they reproduce it. This failure sometimes becomes even more pronounced for girls, whose barriers to staying in school increase as they progress through the system. Now, as a result of these enrollment statistics, as I said it earlier, it can become misleading measures of success, masking dropouts, disengagement, and poor learning outcomes. So, if I were to advise the Ministry of Education, I would argue that equity cannot be achieved through equal funding alone. Allocating the same level of resources to both rural and urban schools ignores the vastly different conditions under which they operate. Equal funding maintains inequality. Equitable funding corrects it. Education budgeting must intentionally prioritize rural equity. We must direct greater investment toward rural teacher recruitment and retention, school infrastructure, learning materials, and gender-responsive support systems. Without this deliberate efforts and to ensure we are rebalancing, rural learners will continue to receive education in form, but not in substance. Rural schools are not underperforming by chance. They are often systematically under-resourced. We spoke earlier about teacher deployment policies, which frequently result in fewer qualified teachers serving rural communities, while infrastructure gaps make effective teaching and learning very difficult. When rurality determines whether a child learns, education systems reinforce inequality rather than disrupt it. This reality demands that we stop treating rural disadvantage as a logistical challenge and begin recognizing it as a policy failure. Now, let's talk about the gender cost of staying in school in Ghana. While we have seen major progress in terms of gender disparities, one thing that we can all attest is that gender disparities in our primary education are relatively small, but they widen significantly at the secondary level. Girls are more likely to drop out as education progresses due to a combination of so many issues such as poverty, early teenage pregnancy, domestic responsibilities, school safety concerns, and limited access to menstrual health support. This means that when girls gain access to school, the system often fails to support them through completion. Education policy that focuses solely in enrollment overlooks the gendered pressures that intensify as girls grow older. Let's go back to rural communities again. In many rural communities across Ghana, access to education does not extend beyond primary level. Some villages, especially the typical villages in Ghana and most African countries, have only a single classroom block or a small primary school with no junior high school within the community. For children in these areas, completing primary education often marks the end of formal education unless they are able to travel to another community. This transition is where many children are lost from the education system. Distance to the nearest JHS, transportation costs, safety concerns, and household responsibilities make continuation unrealistic for many families in these communities. Girls are particularly affected as concerns around safety, around domestic labor, and early caregiving responsibilities often take precedence over schooling. Let me give you a case study here. In 2026, through the work of the Araba Foundation, we adopted 2 rural communities in Ghana in the central region to support education access and quality. We conducted a school visit and also community visits to understand the realities of education and inequality. And what we discovered was so surprising and very heartbreaking. We saw school infrastructure in a very poor condition. We saw classrooms in urgent need of renovation. Learning materials are limited, and overcrowded spaces made effective teaching very difficult. Many students we saw in these communities attended school in torn uniforms, while others did not attend consistently at all. Whilst we engaged in conversations with some of the community members, they revealed a deeper challenge. Some parents, having had little or no access to education themselves, questioned the value of schooling, particularly for their daughters. Without seeing tangible returns from education in their own lives, investing in their children's education felt uncertain and at times unnecessary. For girls, these conditions are especially disempowering. Limited exposure, lack of role models, and weak school environment combined with reduced confidence and aspiration. Now, when education systems fails to produce not only access but also dignity, safety, and quality, girls are quietly pushed out long before they reach their full potential. This experience reflects a broader pattern across rural Ghana. Access to education exists on paper, but meaningful pathways through the system remain fragile and uneven. Education is believed to be the greatest equalizer, and yet the systems that deliver education, if it is not delivering with equity mindset, it just reproduces inequality, and this must change. So going forward, what can we do to move from just access or to move from just enrolling children in school to transformation? Here are several shifts that are very critical. We need to shift our focus from just enrollment to learning outcomes and completion. Education success should be measured not only by how many children are in school, but by what they are learning and whether they are completing each level of education. We must prioritize rural equity in education financing and planning. We need to ensure that we are reallocating resources based on geographic disadvantage, ensuring that rural schools receive targeted support in infrastructure, in teacher deployment, and in learning materials. We need to ensure that we are investing in teachers as the cornerstone of quality education. I believe that stronger teacher training, ongoing pedagogical support, and incentives for rural postings are essential to improve classroom instruction. We also need to address the gender-specific barriers at the secondary level. Policies must explicitly support girls' retention through initiatives like the menstrual health services, and I commend Ghana for introducing the free sanitary pad distribution. That is a good step in the right direction. We can intensify it and then make sure that we are setting up accountability measures to ensure the sanitary pads get to the students and that we are accounting to the public about it. We also need to ensure we are creating a safe school environment, and we need to strengthen and introduce re-entry policies for young mothers and community engagement. We need to strengthen our implementation and accountability. A well-designed policy requires local level support. It requires data-driven monitoring and accountability mechanisms that ensure reforms translate into real change in the classrooms. Now, as I bring this episode to an end, I want to say that expanding access to education was a critical first step for Ghana and many African countries. The next and the more difficult challenge is ensuring that access leads to meaningful learning for every child, regardless of their gender or their geography. Education systems that succeed are not those that enroll the most students, but those that equip all learners with the tools to thrive. Until quality and equity sit at the center of education reform, access alone will continue to fall short of its promises. Thank you for watching today's episode, and don't forget to leave a comment, to share this, and see you in the next episode. Keep winning, keep leading, and keep thriving. Bye-bye.